All right, strap in everybody, because today we are diving deep into the tech world. And specifically, we're talking about the EU, Apple, and a potential showdown over something you probably use every day, and that is AirDrop and AirPlay. We got an article from 9 to 5 Google that is breaking this all down. And of course, the re-up subreddit is already buzzing about it. So what's our mission today? We're going to figure out why exactly the EU is pushing Apple to open these features up to Android. We're going to see how Apple's pushing back. And most importantly, we're going to see what this means for you.
It's interesting how this seemingly simple thing, this file sharing and streaming, is actually like this much bigger debate about who controls the tech we use every day, interoperability, competition, all this stuff.
Yeah. And, the EU is proposing some legislation here to force Apple to open up those AirDrop and AirPlay protocols. Let's get specific. What does the EU actually want to see happen here?
Just imagine a world where you can send a file from your Android phone to an iPad, or stream music from your Samsung to an Apple TV. Like, no problem. That's the EU's vision,
Right.
They want Apple to make those protocols open so that other platforms can just work with them. And actually, it's not just AirDrop and AirPlay either. It's smartwatches working with iOS notifications, non-Apple apps running in the background, the same way Apple's apps do. It's all about something they call effective interoperability.
Okay, so it sounds like they're basically taking aim at Apple's whole walled garden approach, where everything works best within Apple's own ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. They want to break down those walls. They're saying it limits consumer choice and it stifles competition.
Okay, I get it. Now, we're all probably pretty familiar with AirDrop and AirPlay, but, for this deep dive, maybe we should just, break it down really quickly for anyone listening who might not be super deep in the tech world.
Sure, yeah. AirDrop is basically Apple's way of sharing files between Apple devices really fast. It's super convenient, way faster than Bluetooth. And it just works seamlessly across iPhones, iPads, Macs, like anything Apple. And then AirPlay. AirPlay is for streaming stuff. Imagine sending music from your phone to a speaker or putting your iPad screen on your TV. So technically it is open in the sense that some non-Apple devices can receive AirPlay streams.
Yeah, that's the thing I always run into. I can receive things, but I can't send them if I'm not using an Apple device. Google Cast lets me do that, but AirPlay doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the EU wants to change. They want any device to be able to send content using AirPlay.
Got it. Okay. So we've got the EU making a strong play for more open access, something that could benefit users. But Apple, obviously, is pushing back pretty hard against this. What are their main arguments against this whole thing?
Their main argument is privacy and security concerns. They say opening these protocols up could create vulnerabilities that could be exploited. They even specifically called out Meta, the Facebook company. They said that giving them access to AirPlay would be a privacy nightmare. They think Meta would suddenly have all this data about your home network and devices. It could be bad.
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting, right? Apple's basically saying that if they're forced to open up AirDrop and AirPlay, then users' data might be at risk. So it's like convenience versus privacy.
Right, exactly.
And it looks like Reddit users are weighing in with some pretty strong opinions.
Oh, yeah. The re-up thread is just like a mixed bag.
What are they saying?
So some people are really excited about the potential here, like easy file sharing between iOS and Android. They're saying it's about time because they're tired of all the workaround and compatibility issues. Then you've got others who are really skeptical about the EU stepping in. They think it could stifle innovation. They're worried that forcing companies to share their tech could actually discourage them from doing research and development.
Yeah.
And then there's also a little bit of dark humor in there too.
Like what?
Well, one user joked that if Apple is forced to comply, they'll probably just throttle AirDrop speeds down to 4 kbs.
Huh. Fine, we'll open it up. But we'll make it so slow you'll wish you hadn't asked.
Exactly.
But, joking aside, what happens if Apple actually digs in their heels and refuses to comply? What are the consequences here?
Okay, so the EU is taking consultations on the proposal until January 9th, 2025. That's when they'll issue the final order. And this is where it gets real. If Apple ignores that final order, they're looking at some huge fines, potentially billions of euros. Remember what happened with the whole USB-C charging port thing?
Oh, yeah. They fought that so hard.
Yeah.
But eventually, they had to comply.
Exactly. And this time, the stakes are even higher.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so Apple's in a tight spot here. They could face these massive fines, but they're also really concerned about user privacy and security.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
It really is. I'm curious to see, what the long-term implications of this whole thing could be, not just for Apple, but for the tech industry as a whole.
Me too. This could set a major precedent for how tech companies operate in the future.
Now, what about users? Will we see a more open and interoperable world, or will things stay pretty much the same?
It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's for certain. This is a debate that's not going away anytime soon.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've got a much better understanding of, why the EU is pushing for Apple to open up AirDrop and AirPlay. We've talked about how Apple's fighting back, and we've seen some of the potential consequences, but there's still so much more to unpack, and so much more to discuss, and so much more to think about. So stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll explore even more of the nuances and implications of this fascinating story. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.
See, the EU is serious about this whole interoperability thing, like really serious. They're saying we don't want these tech giants creating closed ecosystems anymore.
Yeah, these fines aren't just like a slap on the wrist. They can really hurt a company's bottom line. I remember reading that Apple was fined billions of euros a few years back for some stuff they did with their app store.
Yeah.
Like anti-competitive practices, I think. That definitely got their attention. And it seems like this whole push for open standards is gaining momentum globally, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're seeing similar things happening in the U.S. and other countries, too.
So it makes you wonder, what is the EU's end game here? Are they hoping that Apple will just adopt these existing open standards for, file sharing and streaming?
It's possible. I mean, there are already things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi Direct.
That's what you
Yeah,
could
right.
Yeah, exactly.
It raises a really interesting question. Would embracing open standards actually benefit Apple in the long run?
That's a good question.
Could it actually
Yeah.
lead to more people using their products and services if they played, a little more nicely with others?
It's a tough situation for them. On one hand, they've built this whole empire on this, tightly controlled ecosystem.
Right.
But on the other hand, the world is moving towards, greater interconnectivity. If they resist too much, they risk being left behind.
Like a classic innovator's dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do they stick with what they know? Or do they adapt and risk disrupting their own success? This whole thing is like a tiny version of this much bigger debate that's happening right now about the future of technology.
Oh, like what?
Huh? Are we headed towards a world where all these different platforms and devices can talk to each other without any problems? Or are we going to be stuck in these walled gardens controlled by a few big companies?
It's almost like a philosophical question, right?
It is.
And it's a question that we should all be thinking about. I mean, do we want a future where our tech choices are made for us by these companies? Or do we want a more open and interconnected, digital landscape?
Exactly. We've talked about a lot of stuff today. But at the end of the day, it's up to each person to decide where they stand on this issue. We want to hear from you. Do you agree with the EU? Should Apple open up AirDrop and AirPlay?
Yeah. Will it actually benefit users? Or are the privacy and security risks too great?
And what about the bigger picture? Do you believe in these open standards, this interoperability stuff?
Tell us what you think. Go to our website or social media.
We want to hear your voice. This is just the beginning of the conversation.
Speaking of the conversation, there was this one comment on Reddit that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
It was kind of funny, but also really thought-provoking. Someone joked that if Apple is forced to open up AirDrop, they'll probably just slow down the transfer speeds. Way down, 4 kbs or something.
Yeah. Passive-aggressive compliance at its best.
Exactly. But it actually brings up a good point. True interoperability. It's not just about technical compatibility, right? It's about a willingness to collaborate and create a good experience for users across different platforms.
You got it. Even if companies are technically following the rules, they might still find ways to make things less appealing for users if they don't actually believe in it.
So it's a reminder that regulations can only go so far. We need to create an environment where these companies actually want to embrace open standards.
I agree.
Not just be forced into it.
It's a big challenge. It requires a lot of different things to work together.
Like what?
Well, you need thoughtful regulation, open communication, and a commitment from both companies and users to actually create this, more interconnected digital world.
It's a big task.
It is.
But it's an important one.
Absolutely.
It's really made me think about all the ripple effects of this whole thing.
It really highlights how connected everything is in the tech world, right?
Yeah.
We've been talking about the impact on users,
Yeah.
on Apple, even on other companies that are just watching this happen.
Yeah.
But what about the EU? What are they trying to get out of this?
Yeah, it's easy to just focus on Apple, but the EU's making a big move here, too.
They've really positioned themselves as, like, a leader in this digital regulation stuff, especially things like privacy and consumer protection.
Right, and they often end up setting the standard for other countries, too.
Exactly.
So by going after Apple like this, are they sending a message to the whole tech industry?
Absolutely. It shows they're not afraid to challenge these big tech giants, to create what they see as a fairer, more competitive market.
It's like they're drawing a line, you know?
Yeah.
Saying, if we can get Apple to open up, then everyone else will have to follow.
Exactly.
And that could change, like
Yeah.
how technology is developed and used for years to come.
Right.
It all comes back to this question of control, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who gets to decide how a technology works and how we interact with it?
It goes beyond just Apple and the EU. You know, it's
Right.
about the nature of innovation and how regulation plays a role in this crazy digital world we live in.
It's almost philosophical.
It is.
Are we headed towards a future where everything just connects seamlessly? Or will we always be stuck in these battles over,
Yeah.
Closed systems and proprietary stuff?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had a crystal ball to see the answer. But I do know one thing. This conversation isn't over.
Just getting started.
As users, we have a responsibility to stay informed, to engage in these debates and to make sure our voices are heard. Because what kind of digital future do WE want?
Yeah, I love that. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, all this tech stuff. But we're not just passive bystanders. Whether you're, Team Apple, Team Android, or somewhere in between, we all have a role to play in shaping the future of technology.
Absolutely. We need to understand what's at stake and what the impact of these changes could be.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the EU's push for interoperability to Apple's resistance and all the potential consequences. And we even touched on some pretty big philosophical questions.
It's been a great deep dive.
It really has.
And as always, the best way to stay ahead of the curve is to stay curious, keep learning, and never stop exploring new ideas.
That's what the deep dive is all about. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing.